Joining me now is Juan Zarate, NBC News and MSNBC's senior national security analyst, very active in the early parts in the Bush administration. Juan, is this the result? Is this North Korea calling the world's bluff? And then I got to ask you about the president's rhetorical response today, because it was quite stunning.
Yeah, Chuck, I think there are a couple things at play. One, this is a regime that's trying to not only establish its power, but demonstrate its power in Pyongyang, and trying to accelerate its missile and nuclear capabilities. And the news today obviously suggests that that pace is much faster than prior estimates have suggested. And so they have perhaps reached the point at which they've been able to miniaturize a nuclear device to put it on an ICBM that could hit the United States. And if that's the case, they've surmounted one of the key technical hurdles that remains in their program. And so that's one thing. Certainly, they have been conditioned to take the world to the point of brinksmanship. They know how to not only bluster and engage in braggadocio, the types that we hear all the time from North Korea, but they know how to push the international community to the brink. And frankly, the international community doesn't push back that hard or that often, and it's been episodic. And I think you're absolutely right to suggest that there has been a conditioning of the regime to think that they can push pretty hard without much consequence.
I look back on this and I wonder, how good is our intelligence in North Korea? And I say this because this is not the first time that we've been told, oh yeah, it's much faster than we thought. At each step, as North Korea has gotten closer to this point, they've always, quote, gotten there faster than the United States expected.
Well, I think North Korea is one of the intelligence enigmas, a very hard problem to crack, to both understand what's happening in the regime, but also to understand their intent and the leadership strategy. But I think they've been pretty open and clear about this. They're marching toward a nuclear capability. You've seen under Kim Jong-un an acceleration of the missile tests exponentially since he took over. 3 of the 5 nuclear tests that they've engaged in since starting in 2006 have come under his rule. And so the intelligence is often incomplete and imperfect, but they're demonstrating where they're headed. And the U.S. has a difficult time with nuclear programs, obviously, and understanding where these programs go. Iraq's a good example. Yeah. But even with Pakistan and India, you know this, Chuck, there were difficulties in understanding the timing, the capabilities, and the extent of these programs is a hard problem for the intelligence community.
So the president said that North Korea, if they threat again, and they threaten the United States verbally sometimes, almost after each test. So the president said if they threat again, they're going to be met with fire and fury. Do you interpret that as, is that a red line? Should that be interpreted as a red line? I mean, frankly, I see him say it around there. I think we're all conditioned to think, well, geez, President Trump, he likes to bloviate a little bit. He overuses words. But how is Kim Jong-un going to hear that? How is the world going to hear fire and fury?
Right. Well, I think President Trump is trying to recondition the environment, both with respect to North Korea, but also China and other parties who have a say in what happens next. And I think certainly it's aggressive language. It's language that can be overread and, to your point, can be read as a red line. I see it as a way of trying to recondition the environment and even to signal to the Chinese that the United States is losing patience and may decide to put other options on the table that, frankly, heretofore have not been real options. But it is potentially dangerous, Chuck. I think you're alluding to that. You have a regime that is not only used to its own threats, but is willing to take measures like sinking naval vessels, cyber attacks, and other things to try to provoke and prod. And we then have to be ready to respond. And I think the president's words suggest that he's ready to respond. I don't know what that looks like. And certainly in this case, it can be incredibly dangerous.
One, I was just going to say, what would be the... I buy the idea that the United States, because North Korea doesn't believe that the military option's on the table, that one of the things you'd want to do is, well, they need to believe that, right? In order for diplomacy to work, they need to believe that. How would you go about doing it without, in a way that didn't sound the way the president did today?
Well, I'm not quite sure. I think this is a difficult needle to thread with North Korea, and especially given the sensitivities. I think part of this is not just what you say, but what you do. And I think the sanctions passed over the weekend were significant, 15-0 at the UN. It elicited a response, a pretty vocal response from North Korea, given that the sanctions, if implemented properly and if enforced, will actually affect their economy. I think it's demonstrated with military exercises with South Korea, with Japan, with other allies in the region. More of a military presence. We've seen the overflight of U.S. Fighter jets and bombers to demonstrate American resolve. I think it also suggests that there has to be an acceleration of discussions with China as to what happens next. I think there has been some urgency to this. This now has to be priority number one. And I think more than what the president says, I think it's what the United States does in concert with its allies at this point that matters more.
Is there a case to be made that, boy, the president's sounding a little over the top in his rhetoric is designed to rattle China?
Absolutely. I think you've seen the president in his tweets, in his diplomacy, in what the U.S. has tried to do diplomatically to try to change the dynamics with China. And I think one of the things we saw in the Iran context, you remember this, Chuck, was the Israeli saber rattling at a key time when there were questions as to whether or not the Europeans would impose more stringent sanctions on the oil infrastructure and industry in Iran. And many credit the Israeli saber rattling to a toughening of the international stance on Iran. And so I think part of this is not just making North Korea believe that we have some military options, and these are options that can be taken before they have the capability of striking the United States with a nuclear device, but also demonstrating to China that the calculus has changed and that you have a president willing potentially to use force and one who's willing to upset the current balance that will impact China's fundamental interests. And I think that has been the key problem here. China has not seen it in its fundamental interest to pressure Pyongyang to the point of stopping its nuclear program.
No, and we've got some reasons there that have to do with economics and perhaps the United States. Anyway, Juan, I will let you go. I know you're in demand in our world right now, so I'm going to let that go.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.